Alien Earth did a fantastic job in reviving the Alien franchise, even more so than Alien Romulus, which in itself was a fantastic movie, and arguably the best after the original two. Although the final episode of the show might have been a bit of a letdown as far as bringing conclusions to the various story arcs is concerned, Alien Earth has fans of the franchise intrigued and wanting more. What confused us the most, though, is the fact that this ragtag bunch of Weyland Yutani employees actually managed to capture the aliens in the first place. I mean, how? Remember Chibuzo? She treated the lab with some of the deadliest creatures in the universe as her dining table. Then there's Zoya Zaveri, the acting captain of the Maginot, who was more concerned about what the security officer was wearing instead of the dead captain lying on a table beside her. This really begs the question, how in the world did the Maginot crew capture the creatures? And the simple answer is that they didn't, and someone else did it for them. But before we get into this explanation, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos. With that said, let's begin. From the very first episode of Alien Earth, the Maginot montage felt slightly chaotic and messy, almost deliberately confusing, and then the show left that massacre hanging until episode 5, which we agree felt like a 1-hour-long alien movie complete with some of the dumbest things any sci-fi crew could do. By the time the story circled back, it was clear why. The whole sequence worked like a mini-film, one you could drop into without even watching the rest of the series. For fans, it was a love letter to Alien. For everyone else, it was a reminder of what happens when you trap a group of humans inside a metal box with things they can't control. But the show wasn't actually stolen by the aliens. It was the crew that grabbed most of our attention, and for all the wrong reasons. Compared to the Nostromo, the Maginot felt like a clown car in space, and that's putting it mildly. The Nostromo crew was misled, sent down by a corporation that tricked them into a nightmare. They were forced and fooled into getting some alien cargo on their mining vessel. The Maginot team, they knew exactly what they were hauling. They knew that these creatures were deadly, invasive life forms, and yet they still treated containment like an afterthought, and sometimes not even that. The mission was a 65-year haul to bring hostile species back to Earth, a suicide run dressed up as science. And yet, when you watch their choices, it's clear they weren't remotely prepared for what that meant. You'd think sabotage had to be the reason they failed, but even without interference, they were set on a path of certain doom. Every mistake snowballed into the next, and before Morrow could make sense of it, the situation had spiraled. Safety protocols were ignored, containment slips went unaddressed, and every decision seemed to make things worse. The mess wasn't born from corporate scheming, but from incompetence, and for once, we didn't mind that Weyland Yutani considered this crew expendable, because here, that expendability was matched with staggering recklessness. Now, all of this very obvious incompetence makes me wonder if Weyland Yutani intentionally chose these people to transport the specimens. I mean, it seemed like these guys weren't picked to succeed, they were picked because they wouldn't ask questions. The thing that really bewilders us about the Maginot is how it managed to get its hands on the aliens in the first place, though. We're talking about some of the most hostile, intelligent life forms in the galaxy, and yet, when you actually look at the crew, they don't resemble specialists or hardened professionals in any sense. They bumble through containment, ignore safety, and seem surprised when things blow up in their faces. So how on Earth, or space, did this team capture anything? The more we think about it, the more it makes sense that they weren't really hunters at all. They were couriers. The dirty work must have been done by someone else, maybe an advanced extraction squad whose names we'll never know, and the Maginot's role was simply to haul the cargo home. That theory lines up with the small hints we get from the show. During one of their early conversations, the crew mentions losing a lot of people while retrieving the eggs. That could mean the only capable members were wiped out during initial contact, leaving behind the ones too clumsy or unskilled to handle the fallout, which, if true, explains why every emergency plays out like amateur hour. With the notable exception of Morrow, nobody demonstrates the faintest idea of how dangerous these creatures really are or how to manage them. Zaveri looks lost, Chibuzo treats containment like an afterthought, and Rahim makes choices that defy logic. None of this points to a team handpicked for their expertise, it points to a company scraping the bottom of the barrel and plugging holes with whoever was willing to sign away 65 years of their life. And this brings us to Weyland Yutani's motives. They have always operated on a single protocol. Nothing matters more than cargo. Crews are expendable, synthetics enforce the rules, and profits sit above survival. But even by those standards, the Maginot feels reckless. There's no standard operating procedure for a containment breach, no security detail, no fallback plan. To make matters worse, they kept Morrow in cryo while the lab was active, as if sidelining their most competent officer would improve their odds. When the crisis broke, Zaveri and Morrow improvised a strategy on the fly which showed they weren't completely incompetent, but their failure came quicker and harder than anything that happened on the Nostromo. The scenes in Chibuzo's lab are the perfect illustration of this carelessness. I mean, for Pete's sake, she eats next to the specimens. She handles them without gloves, gloves, masks, or even basic protective gear. Her attitude is less chief scientist on a 65-year mission and more grad student pulling an all-nighter. It's jaw-dropping. Then comes Rahim's surgery on Malachite. Instead of quarantining him, he decides to cut into a man who might be incubating parasites without equipment, without protection. Predictably, the body releases toxic fumes, killing Rahim and taking Chibuzo with him. Zaveri manages to seal the lab in time, but that's more luck than competence. Watching all this, we couldn't help but compare them to the Prometheus and Covenant crews, and somehow, those guys suddenly looked really responsible. So why staff the mission this way? Why risk billions on a team this week? The simplest answer is the darkest. They weren't meant to survive. If the job was to ferry specimens back, then Weyland Yutani may have wanted people too desperate to ask questions and too expendable to leave loose ends. No combat skills, no sharp edges, no chance of rebellion, just a handful of liabilities who would never return to tell tales once the cargo was secured. That's the conclusion we keep circling back to. The Maginot never stood a chance because they weren't designed to. Whether or not an extraction team captured the aliens beforehand, the moment these people boarded the ship, their fate was sealed. Their role was to deliver, then disappear, and that's exactly what happened. It's established that bringing any alien life form to Earth is actually highly illegal, so you don't want the best of the best. You want people who are going to get the job done and not ask questions, and at least the crew of the Maginot was half of that. Now, onward to the next question. Are all the alien specimens from the same planet or ecosystem? The Maginot mission keeps raising more questions the deeper you dig into it. The secrecy, the odd mix of species on board, the sheer incompetence of the crew, it all leaves the impression that Weyland Yutani wasn't being transparent even with its own people. The xenomorph eggs make sense. They've always been the crown jewel in the company's hunt for weaponizable organisms. But the other life forms? The parasites, the flies, the carnivorous plants, the eye-invading ocellus, these feel like too much coincidence to chalk up to random discovery. Which means the Maginot either collected them all from a single source, or Weyland Yutani handpicked specimens from multiple outposts and stacked them together. Either option paints the same picture. The ship wasn't just on a mission, it was part of a bigger pipeline of research and exploitation. In Episode 5, Shmuel is already compromised as the ocellus lodged inside him. Zaveri blunders into the corridor while running from a xenomorph, and Shmuel, under the parasite's command, drops her without hesitation. It's a sharp reminder that this thing doesn't only ride its host, it acts with purpose and even strategy. When Morrow walks in with his gun raised, the creature makes a call. It needs to remove the threat, but it doesn't need to strike Morrow directly. Instead, it summons the bigger predator. In a near throwaway beat, Shmuel cries out in that strange mimicry of Xeno language we've already heard from Wendy. Seconds later, the drone enters. Now, xenomorphs aren't noisy. They stalk, they wait, they move with the kind of silence that makes them effective. Yet here, the drone screeches the moment it sees the parasite. That one sound changes the whole scene. It isn't warning, and it isn't fear. It feels like recognition. Morrow bolts after putting Shmuel down with the electric gun, but the real clash unfolds between the alien and the ocellus. The parasite tries to weaponize Shmuel's ruined body, lashing out at the Xeno, and then there's that split second where the image seems to pause, as if studying something it's already familiar with. The Xeno answers with another screech, almost ritualistic. You can read it as hunger, challenge, or some alien instinct we can't decipher. Either way, it hints at a rivalry older than humans, something baked into both species. This isn't like the predator blood right tradition where one side deliberately seeks out the other. This feels mutual, an ongoing territorial conflict. Two predators locked into the same evolutionary arms race. Their fight confirms this. The Xeno disables Shmuel's body without much effort, tail strike, inner jaw through the throat, and that should have ended it. But the ocellus ejects itself and lunges for the Xeno's head, aiming to hijack its sight like it did with Shmuel. But here's the catch. There's no eyes. The parasite can't establish control because the xenomorph evolved past the weakness it exploits. No eyes, no entry point, no takeover. What always looked like creepy design suddenly reads as an adaptation. That reframes the Xeno in a big way. Maybe they didn't lose their eyes by accident. Maybe that trait was hammered into them by millennia of survival against something like the ocellus. It's not impossible. Natural enemies force each other to adapt all the time. Predators sharpen claws, prey grows armor, parasites find new ways to infiltrate. If the ocellus thrives by burrowing into ocular nerves, then the only move for its rivals is to drop the eyes entirely and develop alternative senses. It's evolution by necessity, and the xenomorphs are great at evolving. This also explains the ocellus's behavior. It knew the Xeno had no eyes, but still launched its attack. Instinct overrides logic. That kind of drive doesn't come from opportunism, it comes from a long-standing pattern. See the rival, strike the rival, even if the odds aren't favorable. The screech from the Xeno fits the same mold. It's less a threat display to intimidate prey and more of a ritual call in a never-ending feud. If that theory holds, then the Maginot didn't stumble across a random menagerie of life forms. It tapped into an ecosystem that forged them. The parasite, the xeno, and maybe even the other species we've seen could trace back to the same world, shaped by the same brutal pressures. And if that's true, then Weyland Yutani didn't only capture monsters, it captured the products of an entire evolutionary battleground. That would explain the odd mix of creatures on board too. They aren't just specimens, they're connected. So, when the Ocellus calls out to the drone, it isn't summoning a stranger, it's pulling on an old dynamic. One so ingrained that even outside of its homeworld, that instinct plays out in exactly the same way. However, there's always the possibility that the creatures were actually collected from different planets, so we guess we'll let you be the judge.